But next in this video is sparking outrage as women across China say it's not surprising.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We start today with breaking news on our money lead. The Dow plummeting, about to close, down more than 850 points. Investors are growing increasingly nervous that the Federal Reserve is once again going to hike interest rates when it meets later this week. CNN's Allison Kozik joins me live. And Allison, is this a one-off, or do you think the markets are going to keep falling?
You know, that's anyone's guess. I think we're really going to have to wait and see what the Federal Reserve does on Wednesday when it announces what kind of interest rate hike is in store for the economy. I think what you see is investors really taking a lot of nervousness to Wall Street at this point because the Fed, many say, has been kind of slow to react to the significant inflation that consumers have felt everywhere from the grocery store to the gas station. You know, does the market want to see the Fed raise interest rates more aggressively? Analysts I'm talking with say yes, they want to see the Fed be more aggressive about it because that would wind up taming inflation, the very thing that is weighing on the U.S. economy. The worry, of course, is that the Fed could tighten too much and plunge the U.S. economy into a recession. It's really a delicate walk for the Federal Reserve, but I think at this point, I think the market wants to see the Fed try to get out ahead of this because many believe the Fed has been behind the curve for so long.
All right, Allison Kozik, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Turning now to our politics lead in the January 6th committee, laying out damning evidence today that former President Trump was told over and over and over again that his claims of election fraud were not rooted in fact. He was told by members of his campaign. He was told by members of his legal team. He was told by even his own Attorney General, Bill Barr.
When I went into this and would tell them how crazy some of these allegations were, there was never an indication of interest in what the actual facts were. My opinion then and my opinion now is that the election was not stolen by fraud. And I haven't seen anything since the election that changes my mind on that.
But despite mountains of evidence, Trump continued to push absolutely unhinged claims of voter fraud over and over, leading Attorney General Barr to make this conclusion.
I thought, boy, if he really believes this stuff, he has, lost contact with he's become detached from reality.
Detached from reality. CNN's Ryan Noble starts off our coverage from Capitol Hill with more on Attorney General Barr's testimony and the declarations from 3 other Republican officials who investigated some of Trump's bogus claims.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
Donald Trump's false claim that he won the 2020 election before all the votes were counted. A lie he continues to peddle, but one that some of his closest advisors told the January 6th committee they didn't believe, like his Attorney General.
He's become detached from reality if he really believes this stuff.
His campaign manager.
I didn't think what was happening was necessarily honest or professional.
And several top campaign lawyers.
I remember telling him that I didn't believe the Dominion allegations.
What they were proposing, I thought was nuts. And the theory was also completely nuts.
Trump's insistence that he won the election despite a wide range of evidence to the contrary is at the core of the committee's argument that he purposefully and potentially criminally worked to prevent the certification of the election results, a conspiracy that ultimately led to his supporters storming the Capitol on January 6th.
I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit. That all the early claims that I understood were completely bogus and silly.
Bill Stepien, Trump's former campaign manager, was expected to appear live, but after his wife went into labor, he bowed out. The committee playing excerpts from his explosive deposition instead, with him detailing election night in the White House.
And did anybody who was a part of that conversation disagree with your message?
Yes.
Who was that?
The president disagreed with that.
The result was a methodical rejection of Trump's claims of fraud delivered by his campaign and White House advisors. Respected professionals who said that Trump stopped talking to them and starting trusting people like Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell.
There were two groups of we called them kind of my team and Rudy's team. I didn't mind being characterized as being part of Team Normal.
Election experts and state election officials also testified that there was zero chance Trump won the election.
There was no credible evidence of fraud produced by the Trump campaign or his supporters.
The committee also drawing a line between Trump's big lie and his fundraising.
The claims that the election was stolen were so successful. President Trump and his allies raised $250 million.
The committee finding donors were told the money would be used to fight voter fraud that didn't exist. The last email sent to donors a half hour before the Capitol was breached.
And today was only step 2 in a 7-step argument by this committee in their belief that Donald Trump stood in the way of the election results and prevented the peaceful transfer of power, at least attempted to. On Wednesday, they will take step 3, and that's where they will outline an attempt by the former president to install a puppet attorney general that would take on the responsibility of investigating those thin fraud claims. And it's at that time, Jake, that we're expected to hear from some former DOJ officials that push back on Trump's claims of fraud and refused to do his bidding. Jake?
All right, Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill. Thanks so much. Joining us now, CNN special correspondent Jamie Gangel. Jamie, instead of fact-checking the former president's claims themselves, the committee today really used former Attorney General Bill Barr as a way to dismantle many of these insane conspiracies, point by point and in general. Why did they choose that strategy?
Look, I think today, Jake, was a very bad day for Donald Trump. There's no question Bill Barr was the star witness. And look, it doesn't hurt your case for the committee when the former Attorney General is really calling out his boss. It doesn't hurt also that Bill Barr is blunt and he is colorful, and we've heard some of the quotes, but just to go through them again, he called election fraud bogus, silly, rubbish, idiotic, and, quote, bullshit, he said twice. He also pointed out that Trump was not interested in the facts. I think that the only question is, why did it take Bill Barr so long to speak today? But I think the committee really knew that Barr would jump out as a very senior cabinet member, Jake.
And Jamie, committee member Zoe Lofgren used the end of today's hearing to talk about how much money the Trump campaign raised off the big lie. She calls it the big ripoff. And she said that members of the Trump family were benefiting from the scheme. After the hearing, I asked her about it. Take a listen.
For example, we know that Guilfoyle was paid for the introduction she gave at the speech. I mean, on January 6th, she received compensation for that.
But is that a crime?
I'm not saying it's a crime, but I think it's a grift.
Kim Guilfoyle, obviously Donald Trump Jr.'s fiance.
Right.
What role does the money from the big lie play in this investigation?
I think this is a critical part of the investigation. There was a team called the Green Team, and it was just to go after this, follow the money. I've spoken to people about this. They don't know where it goes as far as could there be criminal charges, but there are real questions here, Jake. $250 million that was raised. And one of the things I was told by a source close to the committee is they hope that Trump supporters understand that not only was there a lie here about election fraud, but to add insult to injury, Trump and his allies came and took their money by playing on that.
Yeah, Jamie Gangel, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Joining us now is Chris Krebs. He's the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. He was fired by President Trump for publicly rejecting Trump's bogus claims of voter fraud. Chris, good to see you again. Thanks for being here. So you forcefully pushed back against Trump's claims of election fraud both before and after you were fired. So what was your reaction today when you heard from these officials like Bill Barr, like Bill Stepien, people who also knew that the claims were BS, and yet were letting people like you and Commissioner Al Schmidt take all the heat for pushing back on it when apparently they knew it was bogus too?
Well, it was reinforcing, at least, to see that in the depositions, for instance, that Attorney General Barr repeated his claims that he knew that the fraud claims were not true. My team, as I understand it, after my departure, had briefed the Attorney General and leadership at the FBI on the process of election, the security redundancies built in. So it's entirely consistent with everything we knew all along. To have this now on the record in such a forceful way is, I think, important to documenting the ultimately what the this fraud that was committed upon America.
You're being very diplomatic. Wouldn't it have been nicer if some of these people have been a little bit more forceful publicly, given the fact that, like, you went through what you went through and you had death threats and the like?
Yeah, I think all along I would have preferred a little bit of additional support from
some company,
the GOP and the leadership. But ultimately, I think to see the work that we did in 2020 play such a crucial role in establishing a fact pattern that the committee is working towards right now, I think there's some reassurance and some comfort there. But where they go with this, what happens next, and what law enforcement or the Department of Justice does next, I think is what's also critical.
So your name came up today, as you may have mentioned. Alex Cannon, a former Trump campaign attorney, cited your work in a phone call with former Trump trade advisor Peter Navarro. Take a listen.
I mentioned at that time that the CISA, Chris Krebs, had recently released a report saying that the election was secure. And I believe Mr. Navarro accused me of being an agent of the deep state working with Chris Krebs against the president.
I mean,
no, it makes perfect sense, right? The trade advisor is an expert in election
security.
He
knows more about election security.
Sure.
Well, he knows deep state when he sees it.
Right.
So that report was also entered into the record at today's hearing. That's more important than the crackpot delusions of some of these aides. For viewers who might not remember your report and what it found and what it did not find, can you remind us the big takeaways?
Yeah, so it was a statement issued on November 12th by a coordinating committee of state, local, federal election officials and security officials, along with private sector representatives, that basically said, hey, look, we're the ones that run elections in the United States. We know how these things work. There's no evidence of any interference, and it was a safe and secure election. And that was issued on the 12th. So I personally didn't issue that, but the people that we were working with for months and months, if not years, in preparation for the 2020 election. There was a second report, though, that was released by about 59 election security experts that said that the claims that were made at the time, whether it's by Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and others, or whomever, they were technically incoherent and effectively nonsense. And I think having both of those pieces in the record establishes that Trump and his circle knew or should have known that it was in fact a secure election, and yet they proceeded with the grift anyway.
Yeah, and just to remind people, I mean, the claims were so insane. It was that software was being changed via internet by like the Italian military using satellites. I mean, really crazy things. Meanwhile, Sidney Powell, you mentioned Sidney Powell, her video statement talking about how it was a landslide victory for Donald Trump, that's still on the Republican National Committee's Twitter feed.
And worse than that, I mean, I think there are references to Hugo Chavez, the dead Venezuelan dictator, from the grave, reaching and changing votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, wherever. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous that we haven't seen across-the-board denunciations of the grifters. And so I think that speaks to a bigger problem with politics that we've all talked about. But getting through this moment right now, I think we're seeing a pretty effective establishment of just the nonsense we've been through the last couple of years.
Have you talked to the January 6th committee about your work and your takeaways and what needs to be done to make sure that whoever tried to do this in 2020 can't do it successfully in 2024?
Well, I interviewed with the committee back in December voluntarily. I've been pretty forthright and forthcoming about the things that we did and my views on the kind of state of peril that elections are. I think you saw a number of witnesses today that haven't necessarily been as out in front in public, and so I think it was a valuable use of their time to use those rather than perhaps me as a witness. But seeing someone like Ben Ginsburg, a longtime Republican election attorney, and his recommendations that he made today and elsewhere, I think they're laying the path forward on reforms to the Electoral Count Act and others that we can ensure that this sort of sabotage the Electoral College doesn't happen again.
Well, when you see a bunch of these people spewing these incredibly crazy election lies, running for office, even getting party nominations in Pennsylvania and Arizona. Are you worried?
Absolutely. I think 22 is paving the path for 24, where you could see someone in Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano, who just, I guess, today announced he was hiring Jenna Ellis as
sure, why
campaign
not?
counsel, right?
Of course.
You're seeing secretaries of state all over the country that have previously said they would not have certified the 2020 election. So it does give me a significant amount of concern that again, the risk to 24 will be determined here now in 2022.
Chris Krebs, as always, great to see you. Thank you so much for what you do and for being here today. It could be a 30-year first, a big breakthrough on gun reform on the Hill. What's in, what's out. Then, for some Ukrainians, home sweet home can be a dark, dank basement that you're sharing with strangers. Stay with us.
Years ago, and we decided that we wanted to have a Freshman Academy community service project, and we decided part of that was going to be working with spreading awareness of modern day slavery.
At the end of your presentation, you need to tell me how that issue connects to your poem.
There's probably 300, 400 kids in the Freshman Academy. We had all of their core teachers make sure on My Freedom Day that they were teaching about that topic. And now we've got not just our core classes doing it, but also our elective classes.
Okay guys, so this is what we're going to do today as far as packing. You are going to grab a Ziploc bag, and then you are going to start here.
So when we first started this was exclusively for the freshman class, but it was such a hit with all of the classes that every year we've grown and added the classes in, so now it's a school-wide event.
And who are you helping?
So we have two groups, and both of those organizations work towards ending human trafficking or helping those that are in need. It's been amazing because our students have really embraced the idea of learning about modern slavery and embraced the idea of what is human trafficking, how it has impacted them, and it's been a very popular topic to learn about and to participate in.
My name is Stephen Jameson, Global Head of Circular Economy Solutions at SAP. The aim of a circular economy is to eliminate waste, circulate materials, keep products in use as long as possible, and regenerate natural systems. We're talking about a fundamental reworking of how we deliver the economy. At the moment, we're based upon an extractive system which depends upon nature, but is ultimately extractive. That will only go one way in the long term. A regenerative economy ultimately creates abundance of opportunity, abundance of materials, abundance of resources that enable us to thrive as a species and thrive as a piece of nature and as a part of nature.
In our politics lead, a first in 30 years, a bipartisan group of senators agreeing on compromise legislation to try to reduce gun violence. Now, the deal is just a framework. It has yet to be written as a bill, but it is expected to include mental health and school safety resources, as well as an enhanced review process for 18 to 21-year-olds trying to buy certain semi-automatic weapons, such as AR-15s. CNN's Lauren Fox is on Capitol Hill for us. Lauren, senators have been negotiating many different ideas for this gun reform deal. Take us through the framework. What else is in it? What's not?
Well, this bill is not going to be as sweeping as what the president or even Democrats have been advocating for over the last decade. Instead, what it does do, however, is make some significant changes and put a lot of resources into trying to avoid the kind of mass shootings we've seen across the country. That's more money for mental health, more money for school security, as well as incentives for states to pass their own so-called red flag laws. There is also a change in the review process when someone between the ages of 18 and 21 goes to a gun store and wants to buy a gun like an AR-15. Also significant in this legislation is it closes the so-called boyfriend loophole. This is a provision that Democrats tried to put in the Violence Against Women's Act. They almost got there. At the last minute, the NRA was opposed, and they actually took it out of the bill in the last moments just a few months ago. It just shows you how much has changed in the last several weeks, that 10 Republicans now signing on to a framework that includes closing the boyfriend loophole. Jake.
And 10 Senate Republicans have agreed to support the bill, but of course we have a long way to go before it's actually passed. Are Democrats confident they can maintain the bipartisan support?
Well, they are cautiously optimistic, according to aides that I'm talking to. They are going to try to write this bill as quickly as possible. But like you said, a lot of details to fill in here. And just an example of the kind of pressure Republicans are getting right now. Gun Owners of America, a conservative gun group that is a little further to the right than even the NRA, they blasted out an email to their constituency today arguing that they need to convince just one of these 10 Republicans to change their mind. And there's going to be a lot that any one of those Republicans can point to and say, look, I've supported the framework, but I don't support this specific detail that got added at the last minute. So already an intense lobbying effort afoot, trying to convince one of these Republicans to back off. Now, the other side of the argument, Republican leadership hoping to get more than just 10 Republicans because they want to give those 10 Republicans some cover if they're going to vote for this legislation.
Yeah,
Jake?
I think 9 of the 10 are either retiring or not up for re-election until 2024. Lauren Fox on Capitol Hill, thanks so much. Our other top politics story, from a pariah to a strategic partner, that's what the White House is now calling Saudi Arabia amid a possible meeting between President Biden and the Saudi Crown Prince MBS, despite campaign promises that he would ostracize the Saudi regime. For now, the White House is still declining to confirm if or when the meeting with the Saudis will happen. CNN's chief White House correspondent Caitlin Collins is with us. Caitlin, we're now hearing from White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby. He's the highest profile person to comment on this possible meeting. What does Kirby have to say?
Well, basically, Jake, what the White House is trying to do now is square what the president said on the campaign trail and the promises he made there with what he's preparing to do now as president, which is take this trip to Saudi Arabia, which hasn't been formally announced by the White House, but everyone knows it is in the works and that they are working on finalizing those details. And so what we're hearing from officials, including John Kirby, who was at the Pentagon and now is at the National Security Council, is that basically they see this as a matter of balancing moral values and those vows to make Saudi Arabia a pariah with strategic national security interest.
The president has put in place accountability measures with respect to the Khashoggi killing, but Saudi Arabia is also a strategic partner.
Yes.
And in foreign policy, it's about balancing the values, and we're standing up for the values, and we're not afraid to speak to our human rights concerns in any country around the world, but also pursuing national security interests.
And Jake, what John Kirby was referencing there at the beginning is when the White House did release that intelligence report that showed that the Saudi Crown Prince did approve the killing of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Of course, when that came out, Jake, there was a lot of criticism from some typical allies of this White House because they only penalized lower-level Saudi officials. They did not directly try to go after the Saudi Crown Prince himself, basically deciding that the cost of doing so was too high.
Caitlin, today was the first of 3 January 6 hearings scheduled for just this week. Did President Biden say anything about today's hearing?
He hasn't commented on it yet. He did comment after that first high-profile hearing last week, talking about the importance of these hearings and the fact that they were going to lead to new details. He believed that maybe details a lot of Americans hadn't really seen all pieced together yet. And the White House says that President Biden isn't watching these live in real time. Obviously, he has other things on his schedule, but his staff is certainly watching, and they are updating him on the developments of these hearings. And Jake, also, the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, just told reporters they believe all Americans should be watching these hearings and seeing what happened. Of course, as President Biden has made no secret of how he feels about how former President Trump handled that day, calling it a flagrant violation of the Constitution.
Caitlin Collins of the White House for us. Thanks so much. Remember when Vladimir Putin told the Russian people he was invading Ukraine to get rid of so-called Nazis in Ukraine? Well, now Putin's reason is changing, and it seems he's saying the quiet part out loud. Stay with us.
Back in person, the 2022 Afreximbank annual meetings will bring together high-profile continental and global leaders to harness and leverage Africa's incredible potential. Register now.
The Omega Seamaster is the longest running product line that's still produced by Omega. The Omega Seamaster was first introduced in 1948 and was loosely based upon designs that were made for the British Royal Navy towards the end of World War II. What's interesting is most Omega Seamasters will have a seahorse adorned case back. So in the back of the case of the watch, you'll see a seahorse. And this actually pays tribute to Neptune, the Roman god of the sea. The seahorse logo was actually conceived by the engraver Jean-Pierre Burrell, who also has a bit of history with the sea and also from an artistic perspective. And he was actually inspired by an image of Neptune driving a chariot pulled by seahorses, which is why the seahorses are, again, depicted wearing bridles and on the back of Omega's Seamaster-based watches.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Advancement, adaptation, new Marketplace Middle East.
From digital banking to biometric payments, we take a look at innovation and technology in the future of finance.
Marketplace Middle East, Saturday on CNN.
We're here now at the home of one of the FSB team, and my name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN. Was it your team that poisoned Navalny?
It's just been a chaotic scene here.
People are so exhausted. Just gonna help her carry this bag.
We were just in the hospital. It was shocking. Why do you think India has been hit so badly? scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy.
Why does a small group of women asking for their right to be educated threaten you so much?
Raise your hand if you love school.
I'm the one who has to look them in the eye. Can I have your word? These people are depending on you. You can hear gunshots every couple minutes. Now they're pressing in. They want desperately to tell their story.
I'm Bill Weir in Greenland, and this is CNN.
Topping our world lead, the White House says Vladimir Putin, quote, absolutely has weaponized food, as Ukraine and others continue to accuse Russia of blocking shipments of grain from leaving Ukraine, an accusation Putin called a bluff in an interview with Russian state media. Now, after a weekend of patriotic celebrations in Russia, Putin's bigger endgame seems clearer than ever. CNN's Fred Pleitgen reports from Moscow, where the president of Russia has shifted from his initial rhetoric of denazifying Ukraine to an openly imperial takeover.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
A display of patriotism on Russia Day. Russian President Vladimir Putin handing out medals just days after he likened himself to Peter the Great, claiming, like Tsar Peter 300 years ago, in Ukraine, Russia is taking back land that is rightfully Russia's.
He went there to take it back and strengthen it. That's what he was doing. Well, it seems it has also fallen to us to take back and strengthen territories. And if we take these basic values as fundamental to our existence, we will prevail in solving the issues we are facing.
After stating at the start of the war that Russia has no intention of occupying Ukraine, Kremlin TV now is amplifying the new slogan, taking back and strengthening.
We only need to explain to the Ukrainians that we are not playing. We, as our president said, are taking back what's supposed to be ours and strengthening it.
Take back and strengthen. Those words also start the show of the man known as Putin's chief propagandist, then showing images of people in Russian-occupied territory in Ukraine receiving Russian passports, and pro-Russian fighters in Ukraine's Donbas region firing at Ukrainian forces with a clear message.
All of this is Russian territory, Russian land. They had been separating us for centuries, but the center of Ukraine and the south, east, those are all Russian people.
At the same time, the Russians are making clear the current sanctions won't make them change course. The country's economy has stabilized, and this weekend, a Russian company reopened several restaurants formerly owned by McDonald's under the new brand name Tasty, and that's it. Some at the grand opening wearing Z-embroidered clothes, the symbol of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as they ate American-style fast food.
Food and politics have nothing in common. Like, come on, man, keep things separate.
A big run on burgers in Moscow while the war in Ukraine drags on, and Vladimir Putin is far from finished with what he sees as his mission.
And a lot of this, Jake, has some of the U.S.'s Eastern European NATO allies extremely alarmed. One of the places that Vladimir Putin was talking about when he spoke about Peter the Great and some of the territories that Peter the Great took back, as Vladimir Putin put it, is in today's Estonia, which is, of course, a NATO ally. Finland, which is looking to join NATO, also extremely concerned because they have a big ethnic Russian population. And there is actually a member of the Russian parliament, which is in a party close to Vladimir Putin, that has now started a motion to essentially unrecognize the independence of Lithuania. So the big question for a lot of Eastern European states is, where does Vladimir Putin intend to stop, Jake?
Exactly. And Fred, apart from the new Russian replacement for McDonald's, how else is Russia trying to buck the Western sanctions?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now the Russians feel that they're actually in a fairly comfortable position. I mean, one of the things that the Biden administration said as the war started is they said there would be crippling sanctions that would cripple this country's economy. And being on the ground here, it certainly seems to us as though Russia's economy is actually fairly resilient and is still somewhat on its feet. There are No doubt, big issues here. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of the industries have problems getting parts and especially higher-end equipment, which they need. But by and large, inflation seems to be under control. The shelves are still quite well stocked in many stores. And the Russians have said they now also believe that they have inflation under control and that they can keep going at this pace for a fairly long period of time. So it certainly seems as though if there is something that is going to make Vladimir Putin change course, the sanctions in their current form are probably not going to be it, Jake.
Yeah, that doesn't sound particularly crippling. Fred Pleitgen in Moscow, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Also in our world lead, quote, give up or die. That's what pro-Russian forces are, telling Ukrainian President Zelensky's army in the key city of Severodonetsk, according to Russian state media today. Now Ukrainian officials say all 3 bridges into that city are impassable, making the journey even harder for civilians who want to escape. But a little more than 50 miles west of Severodonetsk, some who initially fled came back and are now hell-bent on staying put. CNN's Ben Wiedemann visits a family in Slovyansk sleeping in a damp, dank basement as Putin's war knocks at their front door.
The city of Slovyansk may be half empty, but the Church of the Holy Spirit is almost full. The city is perilously close to the front lines, but with faith and stubbornness, the few stay put, while others have come back. Luba and her family left shortly after the outbreak of war, staying with relatives in western Ukraine. She returned a month ago. For now, home sweet home is a dark, damp basement shared with other building residents. Having lived through the fighting here in 2014, she left because she didn't want to go through it all over again. I was scared for my son and my grandson, she says. Yet hospitality had its limits, and homesickness took a toll. We felt our relatives were sick of us, she says. They have their own lives. You can put up with your relatives for a while, but we decided it was time to go back. The basement is far from comfortable, but it's better than upstairs when the bombs and missiles fall at night. Her 14-year-old grandson, Bogdan, prefers it here. Even if you can go to a safer place elsewhere, he says, it's better to be at home. Even if you have to sleep in the basement.
The longer this war goes on, the cooler the welcome becomes for those who've fled to safer ground. And as dangerous as it may be here, there's no place like home.
With no cooking gas to be had, the kitchen has moved to the yard. The city water supply was knocked out. It now must be pumped by hand. Gone are the comforts and conveniences of modern life, but at least it's home.
And Ukrainian officials say that it may be just a matter of days, Jake, before Severodonetsk falls to the Russians. And the worry is that Slovyansk, which is a city very close to the Russian front lines, may be in the crosshairs. Jake?
All right, Ben Wiedemann in Ukraine, thank you so much. Appreciate it. A woman brushes off a man's unwanted sexual advance, but it is his response that's going viral. Why women in China say this is shocking but not surprising. Stay with us.
I'm Matthew Chance in Kyiv, and this is CNN.
This is the work that continues. Who we are today and what we can become.
This is journalism that reflects the world we live in.
I always believe in karma. I believe that doing the right thing will always end up to making us even more money. Our goal is to shape a better and more sustainable food future by investing in early-stage transformative technology startups to address the challenges that the food supply chain that we're facing. So we have been backing alternative protein solutions in many different forms, from the cell culture meat, fermentation-based protein, plant-based meat, plant-based dairy. First, you need to make those meatless food really tasty. And second layer is it also needs to taste like meat. So we largely look at precision agriculture. We're looking at ag-drone company, ag robotics that can help the small farmers to make smarter decisions on growing their crops to provide a better and more sustainable impact on the environment.
We provide products that make it easy for consumers and institutions to be part of the digital currency market. One of the first things that I tell folks getting involved in the crypto market is we're still in the early stages of it. Less than 5% of US institutions have ever traded crypto. And probably single-digit % of the world's population has ever interacted with a cryptocurrency. That number goes up every single year, and as it does, the total market cap of crypto goes up as well. And so, I don't know if we go from 5% of institutions to 15% this year or next year, but this is the future. Finance powered by open source crypto protocols and a financial system for the internet is an inescapable trend in our world today. And it's only a question of your time horizon. And that's why it's so important to be a long-term investor when you're an investor in the crypto market.
Staying in our world lead, growing outrage after the brutal and shocking assault of 4 women in northern China. The violent attack started when one of the women rejected a man's unwanted advances at a restaurant on Friday. Security footage goes on to show the women being punched, kicked, and dragged by their hair on the ground. The video already has drawn hundreds of millions of views on social media, and as CNN's Selena Wang reports, it is sparking a debate about violence against women in China. We want to warn you, some of the footage we're about to show you is graphic and disturbing.
A late-night dinner turned violent in northern China. Graphic surveillance video of what follows unleashed fear and outrage across China. It shows a man approaching one of the women. He touches her back. An unwanted advance. She pushes him away. He slaps her in response. The assault escalates. A scuffle breaks out as she and her friends try to defend themselves. The woman is dragged outside by her hair, hit with a beer bottle. The men relentlessly kick her. As one yells, "Beat her to death." Her friend's head hits the pavement with a thud. The viral video sparked uproar, not just over the brazen brutality of the attack, but the indifference from bystanders, with only women seen intervening. A woman at the scene called the police and told authorities the following, according to state media. Before this happened, I always thought that going out to dinner at night was a perfectly normal thing, but now I have some sort of PTSD.
These men feel they could just freely attack women in such a public place was because so many men in the past who have done the same. So the men feel, I can do the same without any consequences.
Attacks like this are horrific and horrible to watch, but Chinese social media is flooded with them, and activists say we cannot look away. Violence against women is rampant in China. Video from earlier this year in Xi'an shows a man viciously punching his wife while she holds their child in her lap. The man later pins his wife down and continues to punch her head. The man was suspended by his company after the footage went viral, according to state media, and police said they detained him for 5 days. Another shows a man kicking and punching a woman in broad daylight in 2020. State media reported the man was investigated, but it's unclear if any legal action was taken. Domestic violence was only made punishable by law in 2016. Physical abuse was not even grounds for divorce before 2001. So far, authorities have detained 9 people involved in the restaurant incident. Local police have ramped up patrols on the streets in the area. Authorities claim the woman and her friend are in stable condition. Yet unverified videos show what is believed to be one of their brutally beaten bodies, lying motionless on a gurney in the hospital, bloodied and bandaged, her helplessness resonating across China. After watching that video, Jake, so many women in China said that could have been me. They see this as part of systemic violence against women in a patriarchal society. And the government is trying to silence the backlash. Chinese social media has been blocking accounts, has even censored posts for merely voicing concerns about women's safety. Jake.
Horrific. Selena Wang in Beijing, thank you for that report. Appreciate it. Coming up, she was arrested in dramatic fashion after claiming Florida was falsifying its COVID data. But now an independent investigation says that actually it's her who has numbers that don't add up. Stay with us.
Almost all carbon emissions come from industries that shape our world. But at Standard Chartered, we believe progress doesn't have to cost our planet. That's why we're mobilizing $300 billion to help our clients change the way they operate, accelerating the transition to a net zero world. Because where others see problems, we see potential. We're Standard Chartered, and we're here for good.
On the next Living Golf, discover the history of the sport in Sweden. How do they keep producing some of the world's best golfers? Hear from rising stars.
I think it's just more fun when a Swede wins.
Then visit the region's flagship event, the Scandinavian Mixed, and sit down with Europe's next Ryder Cup captain, Henrik Stenson.
This is where it all started for me.
Living Golf, Saturday on CNN, in association with Gulf Saudi.
As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, host of CNN's First Move. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers. Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley, weekdays.
So many questions about what is the federal government doing. Do you get the anger that is out here?
How concerned are you about the front line?
You don't believe that there's a racial divide here?
Looking back, as president, did you tell the story of race in America enough, do you think? All the places I've been and all the things I've seen, all the people I've talked to, I carry with me. They're a part of what I do right here, holding the powerful accountable, keeping them honest.
AC 360, Tuesday through Saturday only on CNN.
He's interviewed 5 U.S. presidents, authored 7 books, and has an independent voice that resonates.
What happened to when we were united against a common enemy?
He's raw, unique, and one of America's most important talk show hosts. Watch Smirconish, Saturday on CNN.
I'm Anna Stewart in the City of London, and this is CNN.
In our health lead now, insufficient evidence. That's what a new Inspector General report says it found in response to Rebecca Jones' accusations that she was asked to falsify COVID data on Florida's dashboard. CNN's Kristen Holmes dives into Jones' charges. Jones' charges garnered coverage. It led her to become a progressive cause celeb, despite claims that experts say now do not stand up to scrutiny.
DeSantis.
Explosive claims from a prominent critic of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis were, quote, unsubstantiated and unfounded, according to an internal state investigation. Rebecca Jones, who helped build the state's coronavirus data dashboard, gained fame after claiming health department officials in the DeSantis administration were asking her to manipulate data to minimize the scale of the COVID outbreak as the governor was pushing to reopen businesses.
When I brought basically what the results of whether or not each county could open to superiors, they essentially told me they did not like the results.
Officials denied the allegations. Now, in a 27-page report obtained by CNN and first reported by NBC News, the Florida Department of Health's Office of the Inspector General says it found insufficient or no evidence to back up most of Jones' claims after interviews with over a dozen witnesses. In a rebuttal to the findings, Jones and her attorney argue the Inspector General has a misunderstanding of her complaints. In July of 2020, Jones filed a whistleblower complaint after being fired for what officials say was insubordination. Jones alleging it was retaliation for not altering the numbers to favor reopening the state, a claim officials denied.
She was putting data on the portal which the scientists didn't believe was valid data. So she didn't listen to the people who were her superiors.
Jones later launched her own online dashboard of Florida coronavirus data, and later that year,
open the door.
State police raiding her family's home.
Police, come down now.
Do not point that gun at my children.
Over a text message sent through the Department of Health's internal system after she had been fired, urging others to speak out over alleged COVID denialism. According to the search warrant obtained by CNN, investigators traced the IP address of the messages to Jones' house. Jones denied sending the message.
This is just a very thinly veiled attempt of the governor to intimidate scientists.
In January of 2021, she was charged with computer-related offenses. She pleaded not guilty. A Democrat formerly appointed by DeSantis to handle the state's emergency response has said Jones was spreading disinformation to her hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers. Twitter has suspended her account. This week, a Florida state audit report finding the state's ability to accurately report COVID data at the beginning of the pandemic was hindered by, quote, inaccurate or incomplete data reported to the state by health agencies.
And one thing that's interesting here is that actually both sides are claiming vindication in this report, noting that unsubstantiated means that there was no evidence to prove or disprove those allegations. But we have to point out that some of Jones's claims were actually found to be unfounded by the Inspector General. And just one thing to note here about what Jones is doing now, she is currently the leading Democratic candidate in Florida's 1st congressional district, meaning that she is likely to take on Matt Gaetz for his seat in November.